Moving to the countryside was supposed to be a fresh start, a retreat from the suffocating demands of city life, but I never expected that my biggest challenge wouldn't be the hard work of maintaining my farm. It would be a power-hungry woman named Karen who ran the local homeowners association like a tyrant. My land had been in my family for generations, passed down through hard work, blood, and sweat, and it was never part of any HOA. It was legally separate, sitting just on the outskirts of their neatly trimmed suburban nightmare. The first time Karen showed up at my property, she acted as if she were a queen inspecting her kingdom, informing me in a condescending tone that I needed to adhere to community guidelines. Despite my land not even falling under HOA jurisdiction, I dismissed her at first, assuming she was just one of those people who liked to overstep boundaries. But within a week, I noticed strange signs popping up near my property line. Future site of Hillside Café, a community-owned business. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some mix-up with another property. But as I followed the signs, they led straight to my land, the very soil I worked on every day. Furious, I went to confront Karen, who lived in the biggest house on the block, her pristine lawn and overly decorated front porch screaming of someone who had far too much time on her hands. She greeted me with an insincere smile, sipping iced tea as if she hadn't just attempted to claim ownership of my farm. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's for the betterment of the community. Your land has been underutilized for years, and quite frankly, it's an eyesore. I had the HOA board approve a proposal to revitalize this space, and we've already begun development." My blood boiled as I struggled to comprehend her audacity. There was no way she had legal rights to my land, yet she spoke with such confidence that for a brief moment, I doubted myself. I told her in no uncertain terms that she had no authority to build anything on my property. But Karen only smirked, tilting her head like she was speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed. "That's where you're wrong. You see, our records show that this land falls under HOA management now. A little rezoning, some overlooked paperwork, and voila, it's community property." Panic gripped my chest, but I kept my face steady, refusing to show weakness. I immediately left to check my property records, digging through old documents, tax papers, and deeds, and sure enough, nothing had changed. My land was still mine, still free of any HOA entanglements. But that didn't explain how Karen had managed to push this through the system. I hired a real estate lawyer, who, after an extensive search, found something disturbing. Karen had filed fraudulent paperwork with the county, falsifying documents to claim my land was annexed under the HOA's control. She had gone so far as to bribe a low-level official to get her fabricated claims into public records, hoping I would be too ignorant or slow to fight back. It wasn't just an overstep. It was theft, plain and simple, and she had done it so brazenly that it made my skin crawl. Enraged but determined, I gathered every piece of evidence I could, knowing that I would have to fight this with everything I had. But before I could even get my legal strategy in order, Karen escalated things further. Overnight, construction equipment appeared on my farm, and to my horror, the foundation of a café had already been laid. The moment I saw the construction equipment sitting on my farm, my heart pounded with rage and disbelief. Karen hadn't just threatened to take my land. She had already begun acting as if she owned it. Wooden beams, concrete slabs, and stacks of bricks littered my property, a foundation partially poured in an area where my crops used to be. Workers in neon vests moved around like ants, hammering, sawing, and chatting amongst themselves, oblivious to the fact that they were trespassing. Without hesitation, I stormed toward the foreman, demanding to know who had authorized this blatant invasion. He barely looked up from his clipboard, giving a disinterested shrug before saying, "Karen Owens. She's the project manager and primary investor. This is all approved, sir. You're gonna have to take it up with her." My hands clenched into fists as I realized the depth of her manipulation. She had hired a full crew, filed fake paperwork, and moved so fast that it seemed like she expected me to roll over and accept defeat. But I wasn't about to let this slide. I pulled out my phone and recorded every inch of the illegal construction, documenting the destruction of my land, the uprooted crops, and the undeniable evidence that Karen had moved forward without any legal rights. I called the sheriff's office immediately, but to my frustration, the deputy I spoke to sounded hesitant, almost indifferent, as if this wasn't a serious matter. "We'll send someone out when we can," he muttered, his tone void of urgency. That response only made my gut tighten. Karen was well connected in this community, and she had likely greased enough palms to make sure people hesitated before crossing her. But I wasn't going to wait around while my land was stolen out from under me. I went straight to Karen's house, not bothering with pleasantries as I banged on her perfectly polished oak door. When she opened it, she looked entirely unfazed, as if she had been expecting me. "Oh dear," she sighed dramatically, placing a manicured hand over her chest. "You look upset. What now?" My voice was like steel as I demanded she stop construction immediately and remove every trace of her illegal café from my property. Karen merely sipped her ever-present iced tea and smiled, eyes gleaming with arrogance. "You're such a difficult neighbor," she mused, as if this were some petty disagreement over a fence line. "But here's the thing. I've already invested tens of thousands into this project, and the community is thrilled. They've wanted a cute café for years. You're the only one standing in the way of progress." My skin burned with fury. "It's my land, Karen. You don't own it, and you have no right to build anything on it." Her smirk only widened. "Well," she said lightly, "we'll see what the courts have to say about that. In the meantime, the café is staying." I couldn't believe her audacity. She was so confident that her lies, her fraud, and her sheer nerve would be enough to get away with this. But I wasn't about to let her win. The very next morning, I filed a lawsuit against her, my lawyer wasting no time in drafting a case that detailed every fraudulent action she had taken. But to my shock, as soon as the lawsuit became public, the community turned against me instead of her. The HOA board, which Karen practically controlled, sent out a neighborhood-wide email painting me as a selfish landowner who was stifling community growth. Residents who had never even spoken to me started posting in local Facebook groups, calling me greedy and unwilling to share. I woke up one morning to find "Stop Being Selfish" spray painted on my fence, a physical reminder of just how much influence Karen had over this town. I received passive-aggressive letters in the mail, some urging me to do the right thing and allow the café to be completed, others outright threatening me to drop the lawsuit. It was clear Karen had manipulated everyone into believing that she was the hero and I was the villain. She played the role of the charming, dedicated woman trying to bring a beloved café to life, while I was painted as the bitter, stubborn landowner blocking progress. But I refused to back down. I ramped up my legal battle, gathering statements, hiring an investigator to trace her fraudulent actions, and pushing forward with everything I had. Karen might have fooled the town, but the law was not on her side, and I was about to make sure she faced the full consequences of what she had done. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife, the air charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. I sat beside my lawyer, hands clenched on the polished wooden table, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Across from me, Karen sat poised and smug, dressed in a power suit that screamed entitlement. Her arms crossed as if she had already won. The courtroom was packed with spectators, residents from the community who had swallowed her lies, HOA board members who had blindly supported her, and even local reporters who had caught wind of the bizarre legal battle over stolen land. The judge, a stern-looking woman with piercing eyes, glanced over the thick stack of documents in front of her before clearing her throat. "This case is rather unusual," she admitted, peering at both legal teams. "We have a situation where an individual claims ownership over land that legally belongs to the plaintiff. I expect a clear and factual presentation from both sides." Karen's lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man with a confident smirk, stood up first. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Owens, has invested significant time and financial resources into a community project that has overwhelming public support. We are not dealing with a cut-and-dry property dispute. We are dealing with a matter of public interest." My lawyer scoffed. "Public interest does not override property rights." My client's land was fraudulently claimed, and we have the evidence to prove it. The judge nodded. Proceed. The first thing my lawyer did was lay out the facts. The original deed to my land, the tax records, and proof that my property had never been part of the HOA. Every legal document showed that Karen's claim was built on nothing but lies. But when my lawyer moved to the fraudulent paperwork Karen had submitted to the county office, the judge's expression darkened. "Are you telling me," she said sharply, turning toward Karen's lawyer, "that your client filed forged documents to annex property she does not own?" Karen's lawyer hesitated, but before he could spin another excuse, my lawyer presented the bribery evidence. Through a private investigator, we had uncovered email exchanges, bank transfers, and even recorded conversations where Karen had paid off a local zoning officer to push the fake annexation through. The courtroom gasped. Karen's composed facade faltered, her fingers gripping the table as she stared at the documents being passed to the judge. The judge adjusted her glasses and skimmed the paperwork, her frown deepening with every second. Then, my lawyer dropped the bombshell. A sworn statement from the very zoning officer Karen had bribed, confessing to everything. He had been fired and was now facing his own legal trouble. But in exchange for a lighter sentence, he had exposed Karen as the mastermind behind the entire fraud. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. HOA members exchanged nervous glances, some whispering furiously among themselves. Karen's lawyer scrambled to object, but the damage was done. The truth was out. The judge set down the papers with an expression so cold it sent shivers down my spine. "Mrs. Owens," she said in a low, dangerous voice, "do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Karen's confidence cracked. She sat rigid, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. This is ridiculous," she sputtered, turning toward the courtroom as if seeking backup. "I was doing something good for the community. That land was just sitting there. I was creating something beautiful. By stealing it?" The judge shot back. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The residents who had once supported her now looked at her with disgust, betrayal written across their faces. The HOA board members who had blindly followed her lead now whispered among themselves, distancing from the woman they once praised. The judge exhaled sharply. "Not only is this a blatant violation of property rights, but the level of fraud and deception you've engaged in is staggering. The law does not bend for self-righteousness. Your personal vision for the community does not excuse felony-level crimes." Karen's lawyer, realizing the case was now a sinking ship, attempted to request a settlement, but the judge wasn't having it. "Absolutely not. This court will not allow such brazen fraud to be brushed under the rug." She turned toward me. "Mr. Walker, you are hereby granted full, unchallenged ownership of your property, and all construction on your land is to be removed immediately at Mrs. Owens' expense." I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. But the judge wasn't finished. "Additionally," she continued, eyes locking onto Karen, "I find sufficient evidence to refer this case to the district attorney's office for criminal charges, including but not limited to fraud, forgery, and bribery." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Karen gasped audibly, her face going pale as the reality of her situation crashed over her. "Criminal charges?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe the words. The judge nodded. "That is for the DA to decide, but given the evidence, I would not be surprised." A stunned hush fell over the room. Karen had spent so much time believing she was untouchable that she never considered that she could actually face consequences. But the damage was done. Her reputation, her influence, and possibly her freedom were now hanging by a thread. As I left the courtroom, I could feel dozens of eyes on me. The same people who had harassed me, sent me hate mail, and defaced my property. Some of them even tried to apologize, mumbling about how they had been misled. I didn't respond. I didn't need their apologies. I had one. The next week, construction crews were forced to demolish the café foundation, tearing down every illegal trace of Karen's dream project. The HOA, desperate to save face, removed Karen from her position, disavowing her actions completely. And Karen? She went into hiding, her once pristine reputation now in tatters. Rumors swirled that she might even be facing jail time, though I didn't care enough to follow up. My land was mine again, and that was all that mattered. As I stood on my farm, watching the last remnants of Karen's illegal café being hauled away, I felt a satisfaction deeper than words could express. She had tried to steal my land. She had tried to destroy me, but in the end, justice had prevailed.